Some people asked me why it was I recommended that video of Dawkins and Brown talking about cold reading when it was such a sort of blatantly propaganda piece. The answer is that it was also a conversation between two articulate and intelligent people, and Dawkins asked very good questions and Derren Brown answered from his considerable experience. It told you a lot about cold reading. Another person said that the problem was that they were materialists. Now, I didn't think that that was the basic problem, because you can be an out-and-out materialist and you can still use astrology or the tarot. Example of a tarot reader who's a materialist might be someone who says, look, I don't believe in spirits or anything like that, but I find that the symbols of the tarot are a useful way of contacting my unconscious mind and communicating with it. And an astrologer might say, I don't believe there's any influence on the planets on human beings, but I recognize there are certain cycles reflected in these repeating events. Or even someone might reject cycles and simply say, astrology is a very well established, it's built up over hundreds of years, and it is the best language we have for describing the complexity of human experience and analysing it. So I don't think that being materialist is a problem here. It's rather an unbalanced use of reason. Now, reason in its own, of course, is an essential human function, but it is only one of 4 human functions, and if it's elevated to the point where it acts completely on its own, then you have problems. It's quite useful to look at these 4 human functions, thinking, feeling, intuition, sensation, in terms of the earth, air, fire, water, or the 4 magical implements of the tarot pack. And if you look at Richard Dawkins' chart, it looks like a very balanced picture of the elements, except there's one element completely missing, and it's air. Now, if you look at Derren Brown's, it's not so balanced, but you can see air is that very narrow piece. There's very little air. He only has one outer planet in air. So these 2 people are very short of air. Now, air is the element one associates with reason and detachment and objective thinking. What happens if you're short of air? Well, if you put a plastic bag over your head, very soon you'll discover what it's like being short of air. You're absolutely gasping for air. Air becomes the most important thing in the world. If I offer you a glass of water, you won't be interested. Air is what you want to breathe. And that gives a sort of exaggerated adulation of the thinking objectivity element. Now, I've had more experience of people who have no water in their chart. And as the astrologer Betty Lunstead says, people with no water in their chart, so they're people going through the desert absolutely parched. They will squeeze every experience for the water, for the emotion in it that they can get. For example, if one of those people gives me a present, I know that I have to gush a bit to provide them the water, and so I'll say, oh, it's absolutely gorgeous, I love the colour, it's my favourite, and I'll go on like that, really sort of giving them the emotional feedback they need. And then a short while later they'll say, so do you like the present? And you realise they want it all over again, and they may want it again. It's that sort of thirsting that you get if you have no water in your chart. And the other thing is that I might take a person like that to a movie, a wonderful science fiction movie with interesting ideas and fascinating concepts in it. And I ask them what they think of it, and they say, oh, there was no feeling in that movie. It was just a think piece. Now, a similar thing, I think, is happening here. I think if I was a friend of Dawkins and I'd had a wonderful reading which was really life-changing, that had done me a lot of good, and I told him about it, I think he would immediately say things like, "Oh, but did you check that the person wasn't getting information about you beforehand, or did you put any trick questions in to make sure he was genuine?" The focus would be completely on the rational side and not on any of the value that that reading may have given me or its importance to me. Now, as another example of this sort of exaggeration of reason is when reason isn't supported by any of the other functions. Derren Brown gives an argument against the tarot. He says the tarot is nonsense because if you do a tarot reading, you randomly shuffle the pack and you get a set of cards out, and that's the answer to your question. Now, if you immediately shuffle again and put the same question, statistically you're extremely unlikely to get the same set of cards. In other words, the same question a second later, or a few seconds later, gives you a totally different answer. Now, that was his argument against the tarot. And in terms of rationality, essentially this is the argument. Why do you go to an expert? An expert is someone who you expect the right answer from. So if you put the same question twice, you'll get the right answer both times. In other words, you'll get the same answer. Now, if you put a question twice to the tarot pack, the chances are infinitesimal that you will get the same answer. You will get different answers. Therefore, the tarot is not an expert. Therefore, it can't be depended on to get the right answer. That essentially is the logic of it. And it's a very powerful logical argument. But the trouble is, if I look at that from a feeling perspective, I can immediately see the problem there. It's omitting a very important factor, which is respect. Now, you see, I've argued in the Little Book of Demons that when you consult an oracle, you have to consider the fact that you're talking to an expert, and that calls for respect. And I have a discussion about what that means, respecting an oracle, in the book, the Little Book of Demons. I wouldn't talk to Dawkins about this respect. I'd rather say that for the scientific method, reason should be backed with observation, just as in magic, observation is backed with feeling. And so I would say, try it. Do this as a scientific experiment. Go to an expert and put the question twice in the way you're suggesting. So, for example, you might go to your doctor with a set of symptoms. Present those symptoms to him, but of course don't tell him he's taking part in a scientific experiment, because that would affect the outcome. Present your symptoms to him and listen carefully to his answer. Then do what Derren suggests, which is go out of the door, immediately turn around, go back in the door, sit down and give him the same set of symptoms. Now, would you expect the same answer? I don't think so. Very likely he would say something like, look, please, I'm a busy person, I've got a lot of other patients, would you mind leaving me? And if you decided to repeat the experiment a second time, quite likely you would get very angry and have you thrown out. So it simply isn't true that if you repeat the same question, you get the same answer. In both cases, you get the right answer, but the right answer changes if you keep asking the same question. And that is what happens when you speak to an expert. So that argument simply isn't valid because it has only used one test of truth, and that is reason. And when I spoke in Sosopemy about the four cultures, each one uses fundamentally two truth tests. As I said, in science, it is reason followed by observation, and in magic it is observation followed by feeling, and so on. Now, The other thing, when you have no air, is that inability to take the detached, objective view. I gave a couple of examples in the previous video where I showed that in the middle of a long discussion about psychics getting it wrong, Dawkins still came out with the old cliche, it's funny how no one remembers when psychics get it wrong. Now I couldn't help sort of smugly laughing at that, because a painful memory came back to me of just that sort of conversation, I think when I was at university. It's probably the Psycho Research Society, and we'd been to a rather poor clairvoyant demonstration, and we were all swapping stories of all the things he got wrong, and someone came out with that thing, it's funny how no one remembers when they get it wrong. And some smart person said, well, if that's the case, how come we're having this conversation? We all fell about laughing, and I was remembering that. Now, another example is Dawkins, I think he refers to the idea that someone who is bereaved and is very unhappy and vulnerable can go to a clairvoyant and pay and come away convinced he's had an absolutely wonderful reading. And this really concerns Dawkins, because remember, he's looking for confidence tricksters, and he feels that this person has been swindled, even though he's happy with the reading he's had. And so Dawkins would go to the same person looking for evidence that the man's a fraud, and he would ask trick questions or whatever, and he would find that evidence, and he'd come away convinced that the person then had been cheated. Now the problem with that is, just step back from the situation. This man was asking money for readings. In other words, he was running a business. Now, a business, people come to a business for a service or a product, and they get what they want, satisfaction, and they pay for it. Now here were two very different customers coming to this business. One was a bereaved person looking for comfort and consolation, and he got it. He got his money's worth and he paid for it. The other was someone coming looking for evidence of fraud and deception, and he got it. He got what he wanted and he paid his money. So I would say here's a business which is actually providing full satisfaction to such a diverse clients. And I wouldn't say you should shut down that business. I would say you give it a Queen's Award to industry. I mean, I wish my own mobile provider was providing that level of satisfaction. It's a question of being able to sort of step back from things. And if you're on a moral crusade, it's very difficult to do that. You can't sort of, the momentum of it carries you along. And that was what's happening here. Now, there's a lot more I could say, because the real value of that thing is the things it tells you about cold reading. But I think I better save that up for if ever I do this cold reading course, because otherwise I've used up all my material.